my theme for today is what I call cognitive illusions and motivated thinking. Now, the basic thesis of what I'm going to be saying is, firstly, that we don't always know why we take a certain position in a dispute. But maybe, for instance, I may have a moral intuition that I must do this. I believe that this is evil, or I believe this is good. I must do it or I mustn't do it. But later I'm going to give an example. I'm going to challenge you to justify some of your beliefs. And you're sometimes going to find that those beliefs come to you, you believe them very, very strongly, but you don't know why. So sometimes you don't know why. In other cases, you think you know why. You really believe it's because you've read the evidence. You say, the evidence really points to this. But I'm also going to show that we're extremely bad. Everybody, including me, we're extremely bad at reading evidence. That very often we think we have prejudices, we have biases. So we think the evidence points in one direction, and maybe it doesn't show what we think it's showing. And I'm going to show also, or I'm going to try and show, that actual, intelligent, well-educated people, like we tend to say, but that's my aunt, she's not educated, she can do nothing. Actually, intelligent, well-educated, scientific people are worse at this than other people. We're actually more prone to these biases. So just knowing that you've spent a long time studying at university does not make you immune from this at all. In fact, in some studies, relatively uneducated people do much better at unbiased thinking than very well-educated people. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But before we get there, I want to start by telling you a story which I mentioned in my last lecture. Now, this is a story about a disagreement I had with a very close personal friend who I'm going to call Giovanni. I can't call him Professor so-and-so because he might get annoyed. He has a name. And now, first of all, I have to point out that I have to mention he's a close personal friend. So there is no personal animosity in this disagreement, except when we got a bit overheated, but we always cooled it down afterwards. And the disagreement was something not so relevant to the Philippines, but very relevant to political debates in Europe and the US at the moment, which is the issue of immigration to the US and Europe by Muslim people. As you know, Donald Trump is trying desperately by both legal and illegal means to restrict this immigration. And we also know that a lot of the people who vote for Donald Trump think this is just great. So the issue was Muslim immigration. Now, my view on this is I'm a liberal. Oh, I'm not a liberal, I'm a bit to the left of that. But anyway, on this issue, I'm a liberal. And A, I can't see any harm in Muslim immigration at all. And B, I actually can't see any harm in immigration at all, whether it's Muslim or Jewish or yellow people or whatever. I don't mind about immigration. I just don't care. In fact, I think our Western societies very often benefit from it. So, for me, this is basically a non-issue. For Giovanni, he thinks that immigration, he's not really against immigration as a whole, but he's deeply against Muslim immigration. Because he believes that Muslim immigration is going to change the nature of Western culture in directions which he believes are deeply, deeply negative. I'll go more into his position and my position a bit later on. But we both have rather strong positions. We can shout about this. I think his position is silly. He thinks mine is crazy. So that's the dispute. But as I mentioned yesterday, we're both scientists and we both have a lot of philosophical interests. And we wanted to find out, we realized it's a bit of a paradox that we have this disagreement. Why do these two intelligent people disagree about something? So we decided to do a scientific study of why we actually disagree. It was very long, it took us about 6 months, and we never published the results. So you're going to be the first people to ever see these results. And the first thing, what we did is we started off by making tables in Excel and trying to identify issues which we agreed about or which we disagreed about. So we both did a table, we both did a table, a list of things which we fundamentally believe. That fundamentally means these are for us non-negotiable. And I wrote down my list, he wrote down his list, and then the other person had to say, do you agree with this? So these are just, the table is very long, we wrote down about 5 Excel pages of it. But for instance, I said I'm a utilitarian. I think it's very, very important to maximize overall well-being of people. So therefore, it's not okay to do something which very probably causes harm to someone, like denying entry to the US to a Muslim refugee, for some highly problematic and unlikely benefit to other people, like saving Western civilizations, Giovanni would say. I said, I believe in fundamental human rights, and I believe that some of these rights are really vital. So I believe in freedom of speech. I want to be able to say what I want, and I don't want to go to jail for saying it. I believe in freedom of association. I want to be able to form a union, or a political party, or a non-governmental, an NGO, to further my things, and I don't want to be arrested for that. I believe in freedom to take part in the political process. I believe very strongly in freedom of religion. So I believe I should be free to be a Christian, a Buddhist, a Muslim, or anything else, and so on. I said I believe in a lot of these things. Giovanni, he comes up in yellow, he said, I believe in the truth. I believe there exists an objective reality out there, and our duty as scientists is to respect the facts about this objective reality. Today I have some doubts about it. At the time I said I agreed with him. But anyway, we wrote this long list, and it's much longer than the list you have here. We found we agreed about all of them. We couldn't find a single area where we had a major disagreement. So our fundamental non-negotiable values were the same. So we said, okay, the cause of our disagreement is not just that you're a fascist and I'm a proper person. It's deeper than that. It's something different than that. So we said, okay, forget about the non-negotiable things. Let's look at strongly held beliefs. We defined that to mean something which I really believe quite strongly, but I am prepared to listen to counter-arguments. I'm not really prepared to listen to counter-arguments about freedom of religion. For me, this is fundamental. I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to listen to fundamental arguments about genocide. You're not going to convince me genocide is good. But on some things, maybe I am. So I said, for instance, I strongly believe that if you're going to really damage somebody for some reason, you need extraordinarily good evidence to do that. If you're going to execute somebody, you have to have an incredibly strong case before you do it. If you're going to deny somebody medical care, if you're going to deny somebody entrance to your country, when entering your country means saving their life, you have to have some incredibly strong grounds to do that. I said community self-defense. It's okay to defend your community, but for me, the fundamental rights are stronger than that. Yes, I can defend my community, but not if that means taking away other people's rights of free speech, rights of free religion, and so on and so forth. I said it's, again, okay for a government to make rules. I can say, you're not allowed to carry guns in Ateneo. That's a cool thing. It doesn't apply in the United States. You're not allowed to go at 200 kilometers an hour on the freeway, and so on and so on. But again, I said, you can have rules, but they have to respect fundamental rights. And we went on. I said, if you apply rules, for instance, they have to apply to everybody. So it's not that if I'm white, I can carry a gun, and if I'm not white, I can't. That's not equal treatment. Whatever rules I make have to apply to everybody, regardless of color, gender, anything else you consider. And again, we carried on. Here too, we struck a complete blank. We made list after list after list, and I agreed with all of Giovanni's fundamental beliefs, and he agreed with all of mine. So again, we got absolutely nowhere with our, it was a very poor scientific study, we weren't getting anywhere. We looked at our personalities as we self-assessed them. We didn't go to a psychologist. We both shared the belief that they were a waste of time. But we did, in our self-assessment, we both considered ourselves to be contrarians. In other words, if you tell me something which looks obvious, both of us start looking for why it's wrong. So we were the same on that. We're both pretty trusting people. You know, someone says, I'll hold your bag for you. Hold it. You know, we're not the people who lock up our purse every second we turn our back. And so on and so forth. So it wasn't our fundamental beliefs. It wasn't our strongly held beliefs. It didn't seem to be our personality. We did have just a few differences in personality. I consider myself to be a little bit a half-glass full person. I still think of Trump videos and say, oh, it's okay, the world's going to be okay. He considers himself to be a half-glass empty person. I consider myself to be very cosmopolitan. That's my judgment, maybe not everybody else's. But I've spent my life wandering around different countries, and I sort of consider myself a citizen of all of them and none of them at the same time. We had pretty different views of religion. Now, he comes from Italy. You think of Italy as being a very Catholic country. You should know the Catholic Church in Italy, by liberal Italians, is very much disliked. The Catholic Church is seen as being a force of regression, and as being, everyone remembers the Inquisition, when people got burnt and tortured, and every single democratic reform in Italy over the last 150 years has been opposed by the Catholic Church. So liberal Italians, you don't have to be a communist, straightforward liberal Italians, and Giovanni is a liberal Italian, do not like the church at all. And then they extend that. They say, that's the church. Naturally, we don't like churches, and we don't like religions. So there's a very strong tendency in these people. They may be privately Catholic, they may even go to Mass, but they seriously don't like organized religion. Oh, what's that from here? We'll do something like that. Okay. So that's Giovanni's idea. So he doesn't like religion at all. He starts off not liking Catholicism, then he doesn't like Christianity. And by extension, he doesn't like Islam either. My attitude is a bit different. I come from a Protestant background in England. The first religion was a sort of revolutionary, anti-establishment force. The histories we were told at school was about how Protestants fought against dogma, fought to actually read the Bible, fought to read the Bible in their own language, eventually left England to go to the United States to avoid religious persecution. And you know, the way we were taught the Bible stories, Jesus was someone who fought against the Pharisees, who were sort of had fossilized dogmas which were no longer adapted to their world. So Jesus himself was a revolutionary. This was a very different way of viewing religion. And so we got a more positive view of Christianity, but then by extension also of other religions. You know, a lot of even atheist English people still, myself included, have a softness for religion. We think it has value of some kind. So we had a difference about that. But neither of those differences could really explain could really explain our problems. I've said this before, so I'll say it again. In the end, after 6 months of exchanging Excel sheets and of writing emails to each other and of drinking wine together, we got nowhere. We found there were just, the wine went down. We found there were just 2 areas where we really did. Now the first one is about demography, about birth rates. Now there is data which shows that Muslims in the United States have more children than people belonging to other faiths. In fact, generally, immigrants in general have more children than white Americans. I completely accept that data. It's a fact. So Giovanni and I are not arguing about that data. But Giovanni projects that into the future. Now, if I have 4% population growth in my community every year, and you have 1% growth or 0% growth, then my community is going to get bigger, and your community, in relative terms, is going to get smaller. And there are some highly controversial projections which I don't accept, according to which, in 50 years' time, 25% of all Americans will be Muslim. This is just by projecting out the birth trends we have today. From my point of view, I will produce different data showing that when immigrants come to a new country, within 1 or 2 generations, they adopt the habits of the host country, and the birth rates equalize. Therefore, I would project a small increase in the Muslim population, but nothing like the 25% which Giovanni believes in and which some demographers believe in. And then I have to add to that even if it does go to 25%, I'm completely unworried for the reasons I will say in my second point. So the second point were answers which Muslims in the United States and actually elsewhere give to opinion polls. So an opinion poll might ask, what do you think should happen to women caught in adultery? Someone might say they should be stoned or put in jail or whatever. What should happen to homosexuals? And so on and so forth. And the answers from the Muslims in the United States today are much more on the conservative end of the spectrum than those of other faiths. So Giovanni projects that forward, and he says, the population is growing. These are very conservative, he would say fascist people, and therefore this is going to undermine democracy in the United States, undermine the liberal values which he and I both share. He says that. I say that I know from my own experience, I live in a country which is very multicultural, which is England, that Muslim people, the 1 or 2 generations, they change. We now have extremely progressive Muslims in our society. We have a lot of Muslims who fight for human rights and who can't be called conservative by any means. We have American senators who are Muslim and pro-gay at the same time. So there is absolutely no inevitability that people who are conservative today are going to have conservative children and conservative grandchildren. So that doesn't worry me either particularly. Plus, voters do have a right to decide what they want. Second, what really disturbed him badly was that in the same opinion polls, you ask people, supposing there is a conflict between the law of the state and the law of God, which do you choose? Which do you obey? And the Muslims all say, I follow the law of God. This disturbs Giovanni tremendously, because he interprets that to mean I follow the law put down by the Pope or the chief imam. It doesn't worry me in the least, again, because I actually think most of us here have that belief. Whether we're Christian believers or not, we all think that there are laws which are higher than the law of the state. If the law of the, but we know the genocide of Jews in Nazi Germany was completely legal. The law of the state made it legal. So I believe there exists a law which is higher than that, which I am morally obliged to follow. Maybe I can't justify that, but at least it's what my emotions tell me that is true. And there are many things. If the law commands me to be racist, if the law commands me to go and denounce illegal immigrants, I'm not going to do it. And I think this is true for all of us. I think it's what you're taught when you do ethics. So I am not in the least scandalized that a Muslim says he prefers the law of Allah, for instance, the law to always be merciful, like God, to the law of the state, which might say it's prohibited to be merciful, like to put out a glass of water for an illegal immigrant. Currently a crime in the United States. So this doesn't scandalize me at all. And these were areas of agreement and disagreement. Now, now, when I tell you this story, everything sounds pretty easy. You know, we made our beautiful Excel sheets. We said, yes, I agree. Yes, I disagree. Actually, it was very, very complicated. And to be honest, after 6 months of working, we gave up. We got too tired. We never wrote an article about this. And I think that I'm not at all convinced that these are the real reasons we disagree. I think there's some things which are hidden, which I'm not fully aware of, and which Giovanni is not fully aware of. In other words, we have some unconscious motivations for our disagreement. And that is actually the theme of my talk today. I'm going to talk about these sort of unconscious motivations. I'm going to suggest that actually there's nothing weird about me and Giovanni. We're just like everybody else. Everyone has this. So I want to do a little experiment to show this. Can you quickly read the story which is on the screen? This is a story quoted by Jonathan Haidt, who wrote he wrote several interesting articles in a very interesting book, all of which are in your reading list.
He created this one.
He created this one. Okay. Now, if you like, you can shut your eyes so you don't know how everybody votes. But I want to know, how many of you believe that Julie and Mark were right to sleep together? And how many think they were wrong? First of all, close your eyes. I don't want you to know what everyone else thinks. How many people think they were right? And how many people think they were wrong? Okay, you now open your eyes, because no one expressed a controversial opinion. You all believe they were wrong, right? Now, that's easy. That was totally expected. It was a setup. And now I'm going to ask you, why were they wrong? Quick one-sentence answers. Don't be timid. Why were they wrong?
Incest.
Oh, that's just saying they did what they did. That is it's a tautology. They committed incest. It's true, but you haven't proved. That just shifts the question. Why is incest wrong? Yes.
I think the fact that they have to keep it secret means that there's some shame there, and that will take a toll on them, in one way or another.
Yeah, but we learned from it's true, but we learned from the story that this was a happy memory for them. So in this particular story, they didn't suffer. What are other suggestions? Yes.
From a scientific point of view, we evolved to reject incest because it creates genetically inferior children.
Except that they used contraception and made it impossible to generate children, so this is not really a valid objection in this sense. We may have a genetic aversion to incest. Nearly all societies have incest taboos, but it obviously wasn't working in their case. Any other? You've got the main answers for people here. Any other creative suggestions? Okay, that's enough. So you all have a shared moral intuition that for some reason this behavior is wrong. It breaks an incest taboo, which is a taboo which exists in your society and nearly all other human societies, actually a lot of animal societies as well. So you have this intuition, but none of you, not one of you, has given me a super convincing explanation of why it's wrong. So you have the intuition, it's totally real, but you're not aware of why you have the intuition. Now, this gentleman, who's this? Sigmund Freud came up with some explanations. Now, before we get to Sigmund Freud, if you go to an Enlightenment philosopher, let's say Voltaire, or let's say Hume, and you ask them about this, they'll probably say, well, I'm sorry, but when you reason, you have to come up with reasons. And if you can't come up with any reasons why incest is bad, well, then it's not. There are a very tiny minority of people who think that way, but taking their thinking to its logical conclusions, that's what they do. If you take another philosopher, like Kant, I don't think he ever talked about incest, to my knowledge, but if he had done, I can sort of imagine him inventing a very long-winded, very complicated explanation of why, in 22 propositions, about why incest is bad. And his explanation would be totally, utterly implausible. And we would have great difficulty in accepting it today. So you're left with the problem. Now, we come up with Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud does offer an explanation. He says, or said, that we're not aware of the real reasons for our emotions, attitudes, behaviors, decisions. That we create an image for ourselves of why we're doing things. We invent explanations, rationalizations for why we're doing things. But the real reasons come from deep within our consciousness of things which, unless you have a very expensive psychoanalysis, you don't understand. So, allegedly, we all have deep desires for our mothers, sexual desires for our mothers and fathers when we're 2 years old. And we somehow elaborate these desires, the fears they give rise to. The end result is this deep, dark unconsciousness which drives our behavior, but which, among many other things, gives us an incest taboo. Now, today, most modern psychologists do not believe in the details of what Freud said. Freud, all his explanations are sexual. And some of them are limited in context, like maybe he did find these things in his patients in Vienna in 1920. But he gave them universal significance. Very few modern psychologists would accept that. But they do accept, but he made a vast discovery. And his discovery was so big, it's now part of our common sense. We all believe today that some of our decisions are driven by unconscious forces. They might not be exactly the forces he identified, but the idea that some things are unconscious is something that philosophers like Kant didn't know. He thought we all reason. We have good brains, we reason and we work things out. Freud, after him, modern psychologists say, oh well, we do reason occasionally when we're in maths class, but most of the time we don't work that well. I want to skip forward a lot of years and come to some modern psychology. Come to this. Has anyone read this book? So one of you has one, thank you, very good. I really recommend you all to read this book. It's completely non-technical. It requires no education in psychology to read it. And I have a strong suspicion it's very largely true. It's a beautiful book. The man did win a Nobel Prize, so, and he also writes very well. It's a book which is actually fun to read. It's not the tractatus. So, what is the thesis of this book? Daniel Kahneman thinks we have two systems of thinking in our brain. The first one, we call System 1, is a fast thinking system. Imagine that you're driving through your village in Manila at 20 kilometers an hour, which is far too fast, and a kid runs out in front of your car. You instantaneously put your foot on the brake or move the steering wheel and avoid it. You do that much faster than your conscious thoughts. It's totally unconscious, and it works. Kahneman says that about 95% of the decisions you make in your life are taken care of by this fast thinking system. I see someone comes into a job interview, within the first 2 or 3 seconds I decide if I like him or not. This is a fast thinking system. It may be due to lots and lots of prejudices. He didn't say a good thinking system. He said a fast thinking system. Then we have System 2, your slow thinking system, which is maybe part of what makes us human. Now, some decisions, the decision to go into a relationship or to break it up, the decision to make an expensive purchase like a house or a car, working out a complicated problem, maths problem. Some decisions we think about very slowly and entirely consciously. You know, can I imagine 20 years together with this person? Can I imagine 20 years in this house? Can I imagine driving through the village in this car? I think about it, and the decision I make may take me hours, or days, or months. In some cases, it may even take me years. Now, Kahneman says, any properly functioning human needs both systems. You must have a fast system, because some things in the world have been too fast to think about them slowly. When that kid runs in front of your car, you have to react immediately. You have no choice, otherwise the kid is dead. Some things, there is no way you can choose an employee, choose a wife, choose a car or a house instantaneously, just by looks. They may look wonderful, but they may be awful people, awful cars, awful houses. They're not who you want to associate with. So this requires reflection. And the less impulsive among us usually manage to make these decisions. Now, this is also true when we have disagreements. Now, if I'm an academic and I'm writing a paper, I may engage my slow system. I may think, now, what is he trying to say here? Do his sums add up? Are the statistics true? Blah, 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 blah. And then I may very carefully formulate my arguments and everything else. So if you're arguing with a friend, or you're arguing with a political opponent you just met on the train, or something like that, you don't have time for any of that. So when we disagree, a lot of what we say is governed by our System 1, our fast thinking. We have to, and I make up an answer straight away. And remember, one of the key components of your fast thinking system is it's unconscious. So you make up the reasons why you believe this or why you don't believe that. You make up the reasons why, you can make up reasons why you don't believe in incest, but they're just made up. This is fantasy. The fact is there's something in your System 1, you've learned that this is bad, and you instantaneously react by arguing for the badness of the incest. And you do it largely driven by forces which are unconscious, and you do it immediately. Now, this is only one kind of cognitive illusion, the illusion that you understand your own bodies. There's lots of cognitive illusions. Let me try an experiment, which was again put forward by Kahneman. I'm going to give you a slightly Filipino version of this experiment. So it's not actually the experiment you'll find in this book. I've changed it. I'm still very confident in the results. So, Linda, she probably studied at Ateneo. She's 31 years old, she's single, she's outspoken, she's incredibly bright. She majored in philosophy, so of course she's bright. Now, as a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of social justice and democracy. She was very, very involved in demonstrations about the Marcos burial. That Kahneman doesn't have that. I put that in. Now, which of the two alternatives is most probable? Linda works as a senior manager in a big corporation somewhere in Makati. Or Linda works as a senior manager in a big corporation in Makati and is an active feminist. Who votes for option 1? 2. 3. 4. The slow system's kicking in. Who votes for option 2? 1, 2, 3. There's a lot of people not voting at all, right? That doesn't add up. Let's go back to option. Close your eyes. Who votes for option 1? 1, 2, 3. Stop. Who votes for option 2? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So everyone votes for version 2. You are wrong. This is not logical. Because supposing this is actually true, well then statement 1 will always be true. So it's more likely that it's always possible she's not a feminist. Like, yes, I agree, this is a sort of, it's deliberately typical description of a progressive feminist person, but she doesn't have to be. And if she is a feminist, you're still right with option 1. But if she's not a feminist, she's not right with number 2. And it's possible she married this rich man who convinced her that it was much better to be a domestic slave. You just go and be a senior manager and you're going to be okay. So we're extreme. And this was totally predicted. Every time we do this experiment with anybody, any group, students, but also professors, they're no better, even statisticians. We always get the same answer. So, conclusion. We're really bad about calculating probabilities of events. Now, I want to look at 2 political issues in the United States, one of which, Muslim immigration. Progressives tend to be in favor of Muslim immigration and sometimes tend to be against it. Then we have a second one, banning assault rifles. You know, we all need the right to carry our machine gun into Walmarts. I don't know why, but this is a basic human right. It's the second thing. And here it's progressives who want the ban, and Trumpites don't want it. Okay, that having been said, I have some statistics. I don't know if they're real or not. I think they actually are real. So, one statistic is the hit rate. 70, this was actually, it was before the recent white supremacist rise. But in 2015, when this article was written, 72% of terrorists were Muslims. But 0.00004% of Muslims are terrorists. So I take progressives and I ask them, you're having an argument, sort of thing. You're probably, most of you are fairly progressive. You're having an argument about whether or not to allow Muslim immigration. Which number do you vote? Sorry? You want Muslim immigration. Yeah, so you say, look, you've got all these Muslim immigrants, but virtually none of them are terrorists. It's crazy to kick them all out because some people flew a plane into a tower. You know, okay, that's one way about it. Now imagine that you are a defender of Donald Trump. Which number do you quote? Of course. Oh, fine. Now let's go to the second argument. We want to ban assault rifles. 66% of mass shooters own assault rifles. But 0.0000033% of rifle owners are mass shooters. Now this time you're a progressive. Which one should you quote?
66.
Yeah. And of course, if you're a Trumpite, you quote the other one. Now we did this experiment, and we just asked people to produce an argument and quote one of these two numbers. Now you'd think that really, if you're going to be a statistician, either you like hit rates or you like the percentages here. You can't really like them both. And what we found was that progressives swapped. You know, they quoted this number here and that number there. And the Trumpites did exactly the opposite. They quoted this number here and that number there. So basically, what this implies is that each group chose the number which confirmed its existing view. We call this confirmation bias. I'll give you a scientific example. It's very famous, it's not on this slide. It's a very famous experiment. You get some rats, and you get some young scientists. And you tell the young scientists that there are two groups of rats. One has been genetically modified to be especially clever, and the other one is normal rats. The scientists then have to do tests on the rats and measure their intelligence. You do this by running them through mazes. It's allegedly a completely objective test. Well, all groups of scientists, whenever they do this, always find that the intelligent rats do better. The problem is that the rats were the same. They were not genetically modified at all. They both had exactly the same level of intelligence. So, the scientists expected to find someone more intelligent, and lo and behold, that's exactly what they did find. This is confirmation bias. In reality, there was no difference between them. So when we have a strong prejudice, our minds, our system one, always looks for evidence to confirm our prejudice. If we think that we've been sold a lemon of a car, you're going to hear so many noises in the car, so many things which aren't going, it's going to be slow to accelerate, blah, 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 blah. If you think this is the latest Japanese luxury car, you won't hear any of that. You'll think how smooth it is, how quiet it is, how fast it goes. So, if you tell a doctor that someone's coming in and he has a very serious diagnosis, the doctor's going to find symptoms of that diagnosis. If you're telling the person who's perfectly healthy, he's very likely not. So we are all, and this is not me guessing, these are real studies which show this. So we all tend to adopt the view which favours what we believe to start off with. Those are the numbers. When he actually did it, he found that, you know, all the people who supported, is that, if I got it right? I'm not sure I got the numbers right. Maybe it is. I'll do it anyway. He found that people switched their use of numbers. And he also found something which is even worse. The numerate people, the mathematicians, the ones who studied statistics, did worse on these tests than the innumerate ones, the normal people. Because actually, when you have confirmation bias, if you have a good intellectual background, if you know a lot about the subject, you can find a lot of reasons to support your biased view. If you're less well informed, you're not so good at finding reasons, and so you do it less well. So we have confirmation bias. We have the fact that you can't, you're very bad at dealing with statistics. You have the fact that people are just very unwilling to change their views. In this experiment, which is from this year, they asked people questions about their existing political opinions on a number of controversial topics, like fracking, like animal testing, like using drones, like the gold standard, if anyone knows what that is, standardized testing in schools, and so on. Then they divide them into three groups. One group was given reasons which confirmed their existing view. A second group was given arguments which conflicted with their existing view. A third group was given a fairly objective picture with arguments working both ways. Well, what Stanley and the other authors found was all three groups behaved exactly the same way. The information you gave them made absolutely no difference. They basically, everybody, you can see it in the numbers there, everyone stuck to what they're doing already. So it's really hard to convince people to change their existing views, even when it would be a very good idea if they did. I'll give one more example of a cognitive bias. You know, if you read my favorite study, my favorite paper in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, they say they make huge distinctions about when you're arguing with your epistemic inferiors, people who know less than you, your epistemic superiors, people who know more than you, your epistemic peers, people who you think know the same as you. Now, there's only there's a deep, deep problem with this. That we don't know who are our epistemic peers, superiors, and inferiors, particularly when we're discussing topics which are outside our realm of expertise. A doctor does have an idea who knows about medicine. A pilot knows who knows about flying. But if the doctor or the pilot know about immigration, they don't know more than you or I. They know nothing. And we tend to dramatically overestimate how much we know and underestimate our ignorance. Now, this is a study from, it's not actually a study, it comes out in an article in the New York Times, which you can find on your reading list. And in 2014, the Russians invaded Ukraine, which used to be Russian territory. And it looked as though they were going to annex part of the Ukraine. They actually did that, or maybe even the whole of it. And so there was a debate in the United States, it was under Barack Obama at the time, about what the Americans should do. And you could maybe do nothing, or you could maybe start World War III, or maybe you could have some more limited military intervention, again designed to stop the Russians. So there was a survey, and they asked the participants two questions. One was, where is the Ukraine? You could tell me where is the Ukraine? Where's Ukraine? Continent? We do know the continent. It's an issue, yeah. No. Well, it depends. The division between Asia and Europe is very arbitrary. It's in Eurasia. It's on the boundary between Asia and Europe. So, okay. So they asked them two questions. The first question was, where is the Ukraine? And they got amazingly awful answers. I've seen that too. I've talked about the history of the Vietnam War. And I had a serious number of students who thought that Vietnam was in Africa. No, seriously. I've also had American students ask me, what language do they speak in England? You know, seriously, never underestimate. No, I'm not joking. I'm not making it up. Anyway, they asked. The second question they asked was, should the United States make a military intervention to stop the Russians? They found that the answers about where the Ukraine was were wildly off target. Someone put it near Madrid. the other end of Europe. But they also found that the more off-target people were, the more they favoured military intervention. In other words, probably being interventionist and being ignorant were closely associated. So we have to be aware that, in most things we have arguments about, we're not experts. Very occasionally we are. So in most things we're not. And we tend, very, very often, to overestimate how much we actually know. Now, let's apply this concept, or all the concept of bias and of cognitive illusions, to my own disagreement with Giovanni. If you remember, he looked at Muslim birth rates, and he looked at Muslim opinions as we get them from opinion polls, and he concluded that Muslim immigration was an existential threat to Western democracy, Western civilization, God knows what else. I looked at exactly the same. We have no dispute about the data. I looked at exactly the same data, and I drew the conclusion that there was no threat. Now that's exactly the sort of behaviour which we saw in the studies we've just been looking at. We got the same set of numbers, and we drew radically different conclusions. I started from a certain position, and nothing which Giovanni said would shift me from that position. Giovanni started from a certain position, and nothing I said would shift him from that position. And we have to be true, have to be fair, we were both pretty ignorant. So yes, we had the same data. We both had one opinion poll. As a scientist, I'd really like to look at 100 opinion polls, and maybe I'd like to actually study Muslim opinions themselves. We both had read some demographic numbers, but did I read all the textbooks about how the demographic modeling was done? So, no. Did he? No. So, we were both, to be absolutely fair, we were both very, very strongly biased in the way we were arguing. Now, almost certainly, we were influenced by our own respective cultures. I was influenced by my relatively favourable view of religion, and by the fact that I believe religious freedom to be incredibly important. He was influenced by his extremely unfavourable view of religion, and the fact he believes that state law should always take priority over religious things. So, for instance, we're discussing, I don't know if you've read about what's been happening about the veil in France. In France, it is today illegal to wear the veil in public places. And in particular, the worst aspect of it is that kids who go to school can't wear the veil, so the kids don't go to school. And this for me is an abomination. Like it's completely crazy. Why can't you accept it? And it's been so nasty to the Muslim community. There's actually non-Muslims wearing a veil in solidarity. But just because it's crazy, for me it's fascist. But Giovanni thinks it's great. It's defending the secular state, it's defending freedom of religion, because we don't allow these nasty Muslims to prevail. So, again, it's also influenced by our personal views. I don't feel very English. He feels deeply liberal Italian. So this also influenced. Now, in my own heart, I know that I'm right. Of course I'm right. And I know that Giovanni's wrong. The only problem is, that in Giovanni's heart, he knows that he's right. And he knows that I'm wrong. So we haven't, and it's not we're not going to resolve this. And it's not at all certain that I'm ever going to find an argument which convinces Giovanni. And it's not at all certain, well, in fact, it's certainly not. Giovanni is not going to find an argument which convinces me. But even if that's true, I would argue this doesn't make our disagreement pointless. Like we discussed for 6 months, and we have not convinced each other. But other things have been happening. If we go back to the diagram I showed in our first lecture. Okay, this is me, P1 is me, P2 is Giovanni. We got nowhere. But if any of you are strongly in favor of religious freedom for all religions, and you strongly think that immigration to Western countries should be free, and you dislike going to the embassy at the time and doing 6 weeks of visa applications, well, then I've given you some additional arguments. So I've strengthened my supporters. That's good. First thing. Not only that, probably Giovanni, if he ever talks about this with anybody, they'll be very pleased that he's made his argument and he will strengthen his supporters. But I hope you here, you neutral observers, you didn't come into this debate between you and Giovanni with a preconceived position. You may have your positions. You know, Muslim immigration to the United States isn't quite your first concern. So I assume most of you are relatively neutral. I hope that by presenting this, even though I've not presented you a single valid argument why I'm right and why Giovanni is wrong, I will actually convert some of you neutral observers to a position at least slightly more favourable to the free free immigration position. So even if I can also just make you think. I can raise questions you may never have asked, like, should I always favour freedom of religion if maybe it has some risks to my own beliefs or my own faiths? Should I always defend my community, even if this causes suffering for other people? Is Giovanni right? Is Richard right? Are they both right in some way? Are they both wrong in some way? Hopefully I can raise those questions. And can any of you provide convincing arguments why one of us is right and one is wrong? Again, I think you're going to find it pretty hard, just like we did for the incest argument at the beginning. You may have a strong moral intuition that one of these two positions is right, but I think justifying it is not going to be easy, because the actual evidence available is relatively small. So these are the issues I'm going to be discussing in my next lecture, which is about disagreements about values. But I don't want to leave you with the impression, oh, Richard has cognitive illusions, Giovanni has cognitive illusions, they're just the same. Even though I know I have cognitive illusions, even though I know there's lots of things I don't know, I still believe that religious freedom trumps Trump. And I still believe it trumps your right to defend your own prejudices. I still prefer to be a citizen of the world rather than a citizen of one tiny corner of England, which is currently tearing itself apart about Brexit. So the real question is, I do have all these feelings. I really believe them strongly. But how can I possibly justify them intellectually? How can I justify them philosophically? Should I have to justify? Do I need to justify? Can I just follow my instincts blindly? And if I do have these beliefs, and I meet a Giovanni, or I meet someone who is the same as Giovanni but much less nice, how should I behave? Now, these are the issues I'm going to be talking about in the next few lectures. And the first of this series is next Monday, I'm going to be talking about conflicts about values, because of course this ultimately boils down to a conflict about values. I'm then going to be moving to conflicts about facts and theories. I'm also very shocked that conflicts about values are not so special as we often think, but actually conflicts about values and conflicts about facts can be very similar, and there's strong subjective elements in both. That is for the next lecture. We now have time for questions, and I would really appreciate questions. The more the better. And doubts and objections. Yes.
Have you ever asked Giovanni was that what if Giovanni was in the Muslim's position? Well, what would he have done? Or have you ever asked him about that?
That's a very, very good question. The empirical answer is no. Maybe I should. That might be interesting. It's sort of Kantian position. You know, can my belief be used as a belief for everybody, or can his belief? You're challenging me. You're saying, can your belief be used as a basis for everybody? I don't know what to reply. But I think the question is a very, very good one. So that's something which, later I'm going to talk about how we can actually conduct ourselves in disagreements, and I think that's a good question. Modern psychologists call it perspective taking. So put yourself in the shoes of the other guy, and that is actually an important part if you actually want to reach an agreement about something. Being able to see why the other guy has taken the position he or she has is super important. So I'm going to argue later that you don't always have to agree. Agreement, as we said earlier, is not necessarily a good thing. But if agreement is what you're looking for, you must be able to do what you said, which is put. Of course, you asked, have I ever asked Giovanni to put myself in? But you could also ask, have I ever put myself in the position in a beleaguered white community, seeing all these people with veils coming in? It's a very good question. Yes?
So how do we approach the incest question? Because I do get that we're using our fasting system, and we're saying no to the incest part because we have our biases towards it. But then how are we going to approach it? Do we just accept incest because I was just biased towards it?
Not necessarily. So this is actually the theme of what I'm going to be talking about in the next lecture. But just to anticipate a little bit, I don't think we should see your intuitions as something purely individual or purely. It's not a matter just of. I don't believe in Freud in this. I don't think that we each individually developed an incest taboo because of some mysterious thing which happened in our childhood. I just don't believe that. I think that our cultures have developed an incest taboo. And you mentioned the genetic consequences of incest. I think this is one of the reasons. We have to relativize a little bit because it's true that all cultures have an incest taboo. It's also true that it's defined in different cultures. So, for instance, in Western cultures, it's prohibited, more or less, to marry your brother's wife. In some other cultures, it's actually, if your brother dies, it's mandatory. So, in most cultures, some sort of cousin marriage is not allowed. But how far that extends varies from culture to culture. But I think cultures have evolved an incest taboo, and they've done it because it's useful for the culture. The taboo gives the culture a good outcome. So when I talk about conflicts of values, I'm going to talk about values as something we evolve as a culture. And I think you're not aware of all the work the culture has done to develop something, but that doesn't mean it's not there. So I move it from individual psychology through to the, if you like, the psychology of the culture how it's developed and what it's trying to do. I think that's where it comes from. Which doesn't stop you from testing. You know, Nietzsche actually said, he said, okay, this is good for the good of the species. I can accept that. Doing X, Y, Z protects the species. But then he said, well, why should I protect the species? No, that's not a moral imperative. I just go off on my own. That's one position. We can decide if we like that position or not. But I think evolution has given us some very, very strong evolution. I mean, not so much genetic evolution as cultural evolution. Our cultures have developed rules which we tend to obey. That's what we feel as moral intuitions. That we might take them. It doesn't happen. It's not the only thing. Other questions? These have been good questions. Can we carry on? Yes.
To go back to the different studies that sort of show the reality that is confirmation bias, particular studies given. I feel like it's an element that we can't really do away with, and maybe we should change our perspective on it. So is it wrong to say that the problem isn't with confirmation bias, but rather stopping there and not moving forward further with it? Because given the different studies that were presented, it feels like it's a fact that we should deal with rather than just accept as is. Because I feel like confirmation bias, without it, would do away with any fruitful progress in any disagreement.
I think there's at least two answers to this. One is individual, one is social. At the purely individual level, we can try and move beyond our confirmation bias, which is what we do when we're scientists. So I, as a scientist, know that I'm subject to confirmation bias. Therefore, I try and design my experiments in such a way as to avoid that. For instance, when I do animal experiments, if I take a video of the animal behaving, I blind it. So I don't know which animal is meant to behave one way, which one is meant to behave the other. If I want to be even more rigorous, I take the videos and I get 5 other people to do the judging, and not me, because I have prejudices and I might be able to guess. I remember that rat had a white spot, so I know it's meant to be the intelligent group. I give it to other people to evaluate. And we do the same throughout science. We always have very careful controls. Now, these are not perfect. They often fail. And I can be biased even in selecting my controls. But at least scientists try. And I think we can do this at a societal level as well. You know, maybe I can't trust a politician, even an honest politician, to get over his confirmation biases. But when we have a process of discussion between people of different persuasions, well then maybe sometimes, particularly when it's not too heated, system 2 can kick in and we can actually start thinking about what would be best, because we all know that position 1, we're just not going to adopt it as is. And the opposite position 2, we're not going to adopt as is either. And somehow we have to work towards deciding what we're actually going to do. So I think these social processes of discussion, dialogue, challenge, and disagreement is a fundamental part of it, are actually what can move us beyond the confirmation bias and also our other cognitive illusions as well. I'm ignorant, but not everyone is ignorant. If I think that Ukraine's in South America, someone is going to raise their hand and say, well, no, it isn't. And I might even recognize they're right. I'd be very, very ashamed. One question.
I have a question about the way that you brought together the idea of the unconscious in Freud on the one hand, and the fasting and slow thinking in Kahneman, because I don't see like the line that seems to be being drawn between those two frameworks. Not least because how I understand the Kahneman idea is that we have system 1, which is economical in the sense that it's fast, but also that it consumes less resources. But all these mental processes take place at the subpersonal, non-conscious level. and they drive responses, cognitive, non-cognitive responses and behavior. But in the Freudian idea, there seems to be like this almost like a monster living beneath the thing that's kind of rising and driving things. And there are processes there that you are unconscious of, but are actually things that you actively engage in and think about. And it seems to me that those are two very different things.
Well,
And I think it has consequences for disagreement, because if you say I have biases of the sort that Kahneman talks about, which goes in the direction of cognitive bias, overconfidence, complacency, badness, and statistical thinking, right? Those seem to me correctable in the sense that you described. Like I ask 5 other people to look at experiments and so on. But if it's of the Freudian sort, I'm not sure that kind of approach would work.
Okay, Kahneman is not derived directly from Freud, but like everybody else, everybody who has a degree in psychology, he has read Freud, studied Freud, and therefore is unconsciously influenced by Freud, in his sense of the word. So I think, so the superficial manifestation of a Kahneman-style cognitive bias is I make one decision when maybe if I thought carefully I would take the other. And it's driven by system one. But system one is not neutral. System one is it's created by learning when you're a child and learning from your society. So let's take the example of the incest bias or any other view of sexuality. I'll take very often when we're kids, it's very rare, I think, that someone says, don't commit incest. Right? That's really not part of our education, right? But everyone behaves in such a way as that incest was a taboo. The same applied until relatively recently about homosexual behavior. I was never told as a kid that being homosexual was bad, but everyone behaved in such a way as that homosexuality was horrible. And we internalize that. And now if I then go and come out and start doing, not in that sense, and start looking at statistical studies, that bias will come out as a cognitive bias. I'm not accepting statistics, or I'm being ignorant or something, and so on. But deeper down, it's the cultural, it's my upbringing, it's the result of my culture. And I think if I then move from the statistical study to the psychoanalyst, he's going to say, but you've got this deep fear of this and this and the other. It's going to be rather similar. It's just two different. If I'm a statistician, I see it as a series of responses to numbers. If I'm a psychoanalyst, I'm going to make me lie down on the couch and do free association, and I'm going to find these deep fears underneath. But I think they're two manifestations of a similar thing. It's the training of your system one, which Freud labels one way. Freud is very interested in some specific kinds of training. Kahneman makes it much broader. So for instance, we know that a lot of people have intuitive racist reactions to things. And you come from the deep American South, you're in a small white community, you often learn these things. And you believe it's totally spontaneous. And if I expose you to studies like this, you're going to show up exactly the sort of things we saw in the scientific studies. And if you're interrogated by your psychoanalyst, he's going to find a deep fear of non-white people. I think there are two different languages to describe the phenomenon, but I'm not sure the reality is very different. But you're allowed to disagree with that, even heated. Yes.
Regarding Kahneman's System 1 and System 2, are the two cognitive processes actually affected by familiarity of experience? For example, I'm trying to cook adobo for the first time, and you throw me in the kitchen. I don't have any idea as to how to cook adobo, so I'm trying to look at instructions, trying to figure out how to.
Which always forget the vital ones, like how much salt.
Yes. So I'm trying to think about it slowly and then I execute it very carefully. But then after having to cook adobo, after having tasted it, finding it its favorite dish, I've been continually cooking it for maybe at least a year.
And it becomes automatic.
Yeah, it becomes automatic. So is that actually somehow related to the whole process?
Yes, it is very deeply. I think that's absolutely correct. So we actually know in cognitive science, you have a process of automation of processes. And the example that everyone always gives is driving a car. So when you learn to drive a car, you're with the driving instructor first time. Now put your foot on the pedal slowly. Don't turn to do this, do that, do that. You've got all these verbal instructions ringing through your head, and you do it incredibly badly. So I don't think that a driver should be allowed to drive ever. I was desperately dangerous. But then you do that for a few years, and it's totally automatic. It becomes so automatic and so unconscious that you're not a good driving instructor. You can't teach somebody else how to do it because you don't know. You just do it. So you get this process whereby a thing which was completely conscious actually becomes unconscious and much cheaper and much more effective. It's amusing because making the contrast with Freud. Freud wants to do exactly the opposite. You know, he has this wonderful slogan where he says, "Wo etwa soll ich werden?" Where my unconscious was, it will become conscious. So he's trying to actually take these unconscious processes, bring them out into the open and make you think about them. And what we actually do in our lives a lot of the time is think about things a lot and then stop thinking about them and make them unconscious. Anything else? Yes.
I'd like to give a comment on what you just stated about bringing that which is
Loud voice, please.
bringing that which is unconscious into the conscious realm. I think it's very appropriate with what we're trying to discuss with these series of lectures, is the disagreement. And I find that disagreement generally is taken in a way that makes us feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
or kind of disturbs us. And anything that we bring back into consciousness from that we have already pushed toward this efficient unconscious state is a very unsettling and a very
Yeah.
disturbing process. So,
As is psychoanalysis.
yeah, so I think this is kind of went full circle with what we're trying to discuss, which is
Yeah.
disagreement, and that it could be it is a process in which we can bring back, or maybe if it's appropriate to say, save that which just become unconscious into conscious.
I think that's an extremely good comment. It's not in my lectures. So you get a point for bringing in a new idea. Thank you. That's good. Anything else? It might well be in the transcript. Anything else? Look, I'd like to thank you. This has been a very good discussion. I'm really pleased that you contributed. Please carry on that work. You don't have to be, as you see, it's not scary. And I think, I found when I started preparing these lectures, I didn't really know about disagreement. I'm working out my ideas as I go along. And these discussions help to work out the ideas. I don't know if you know that we're planning, but at the end, planning is different from promising. But Jackie and my idea is that in the end this becomes a publication of some kind. We want to make it into a book. And the book doesn't have to be the literal transcript of the lectures. We want to actually say something which is as true as possible, as true as we can make it. And all your ideas count for this because, as we said before, with the confirmation bias, it's other people who often can help you to get over your own biases, of which we all have plenty. So, thank you very much. Same time, same place, next month. Thank you.